Serious, what do you think is the creepiest / most disturbing unsolved mystery ever? In the early 80s, all within 18 months of each other, 3 paperboys in the Des Moines, Iowa area all went missing during their morning route. The cases have never been solved. There are theories ranging from a pedophilia ring, an ex-employee who was a creeper kidnapping them, and even a lone wolf type situation. It's a bizarre case that has baffled Iowa for years. In 1969, a student was killed in the stacks of the library at my old college, Penn State, and was found with a singular stab wound on her chest. It wasn't even late or anything, and while there were many suspects, no one was ever arrested for it. It's insane how someone could kill a person in broad daylight at a major university and get away with it. It's not really anything super crazy in comparison to other stories here. It's just weird to me personally because I would always study there and I didn't find out about it until after I graduated. My dad liked the route as well, but he said he was pissed cause this one guy kept stealing from the drop-off stack of newspapers, and it came out of his paycheck. He said he told them about the thefts, but they didn't care he's a kid. So he camped out super early with a BB gun and shot near the guy when he went to grab a paper. The guy took off back into his house and he never seemed to have issues with missing papers after that. As for missing/murdered people, coincidentally and sadly my dad's babysitter when he was a child. Kristen David. Biking down the hill alone between towns, she ended up missing and was found a week and a half later floating down the river, dismembered in trash bags. Still unsolved along with several other murders here such as the Civic Theater murders. Those ones piss me off because the guy who did it got away scot-fucking-free and it was super obvious it was him, but they had zilch as far as physical evidence. Couldn't find traces of residue blood because it was compromised by the lead paint left behind from productions. Pacific Northwest was a bit of a hotspot for serial killers apparently. So he camped out super early with a BB gun and shot near the guy when he went to grab a paper. The guy took off back into his house and he never seemed to have issues with missing papers after that. Reminds me of a story my dad told. When he was a kid, one of the neighbors was a creep who would look into people's windows. This being the countryside in the 60s, he was politely referred to as nosy. He looked into everyone's windows, but spent more time doing so at houses where women were home alone. My grandmother was recently widowed, and he was at her windows every day. My dad, 12 years old and the newly minted man of the house, loaded the shotgun with rock salt and shot him in the seat of his pants. My grandmother refused to pay for the damaged suit, which was high praise to my dad. The creep stopped peeping when it became clear the whole parish was likely to follow my dad's example. They'd had enough. Read The Satin Man by Alan Whitaker. Super compelling theory. I think he has it. Creepy neighbor guy who had a history of abuse and got off on the texture of satin. In the basement someone noticed a little girl's purse matching a purse belonging to one of the Beaumont children. The disappearance of the Beaumont children are siblings who disappeared in 1966. There are still to this day investigations ongoing to try and find the remains of these children. There have been foundations of sheds and houses dug up, the children have never been found and the suspects has never been identified. The Setagaya family murder, late on the night of December 30, 2000 in Setagaya, Tokyo, a man broke into the house of a family of 4, strangled the son in his bed, stabbed the father, and brutally killed the mother and daughter. The killer then spent hours in the house eating their food, using their toilet, and going through their paperwork like he owned the place, and eventually left, never to be found since. I just read up on it and he took a nap. A nap, I think the Colombian government killed him tbh. He got away several times. About 200 lives could have been saved if this one U.S. missionary would have just minded his own business. He said that after being released from prison, he moved to Peru and started murdering young girls. Lopez claimed that, by 1978, he had killed over 100 girls before being caught and captured by members of an indigenous tribe. These captors were preparing to execute him, when a missionary from the U.S. intervened and persuaded them to hand him over to state police. However, the police had quickly released him. Probably not even the government. Probably just some Colombian cop or cops who decided to take matters into their own hands. Drug war violence was still really bad at that time, not to mention the FARC insurgency and the AUC massacres, so extrajudicial killings happened all the time. If some cops decided to go vigilante on him and then dispose of his body, then it probably wouldn't have been the first, third, or 12th time it happened that year. The Axeman of New Orleans guy was murdering people but wrote a letter that he wouldn't kill anyone who played jazz in their home. Never caught. I remember reading about that from Aaron Mahnke's lore. Funniest part was, he kept his promise. That night, jazz emanated from every house, and nobody was killed by him again. Honestly, the Cape intruder isn't disturbing, just weird as hell. During the night in Cape, Maine, in like 2005, people who kept their doors unlocked would wake up to find a man staring at them, and he would quickly flee. No people were ever injured and nothing was ever stolen. They just watched people sleep apparently. Someone said that the police could have all hid in one house not playing jazz music and catch him that way. That gave me the creeps, yikes. With all these horrible things in this thread, that one creeped me out the most. That guy could be someone in this Reddit post reading about himself and posting and shit. I guess we'll never know. The Cleveland torso murderer. From 1935 to 1938, there was a serial killer who chopped off the heads and appendages of 12 to 20 people and left their torsos for people to find. The famous detective Eliot Ness was on the case, and the killer taunted him by leaving 2 torsos within full view of his office. The killer was never identified, nor were the majority of the victims. Ness narrowed down a suspect, interrogated him secretly in a hotel room for a couple of days. He was a surgeon who was the nephew of a prominent politician of Cleveland at the time. Something Sweeney, I think. Forgot the name now. My grandpa wrote a book on this case. The killer will never be identified, and the victims especially. The victims seemed to be mostly homeless, prostitutes, etc. They weren't exactly traceable people. The killer was surgical. Like literally surgical in the cuts. Nobody will ever know who did it, but Eliot Ness was tortured with solving the case. Though, not as much as the victims were undoubtedly tortured, sadly. It'll remain an unsolved serial killer case. It's very interesting. Edit. Totally didn't expect this to blow up, and I'm seeing a few people have asked the title of the book. It's called Torso and has been out of print for a while, but should be able to find it on Amazon. You can find anything on Amazon. I forget the dude's name, but the running theory for a long time was that the guy you're talking about was the killer. That theory was at least partially debunked sometime in the last 5 to 10 years. New evidence came out proving that the guy we're talking about couldn't have committed all of the murders that are generally attributed to the torso killer. Of the 4 or 5 people still living that can be considered experts on this case, one of them believes that there were 2 serial killers active in the same area at the same time, the guy we are talking about and an unknown second killer. I can't remember his name. But there was a case of a college-age young man, Brian I think is his first name, who was reported missing after a night out. There's security camera footage of him entering a bar, but absolutely no footage of him leaving. Like he went into the bar and just flat out dropped off the face of the earth. The last I knew, he's never been found and nobody knows what happened to him. ETA, Brian Schaefer, who went missing from Columbus, Ohio. Thanks, Reddit. Also ETA, since it keeps coming up, the bar was on a 2nd floor at that time with only one public entrance/exit. The police extensively reviewed all the security camera footage. Brian and everyone else who was there that night was seen on camera entering the bar. Everyone, except for Brian, who was at the bar that night, was seen on camera leaving the bar. Which would nix any theories that he left wearing different clothes/disguised as someone else/mixed in with a crowd.